Where the hell was he taking us? Seeing how Kai was earlier that morning, neither of us asked where we were headed. I was afraid he might snap again like he did towards Tomoaki. A couple minutes went by when the driver said, "There's a car following us. Do you know who it might be?" We all turned around and saw a small pickup truck driving right up the taxi's arse. There was a man waving his hand out the driver's side window, and we realized it was Makiko's husband. Thinking one of us left something behind, we asked the driver to stop. Makiko's husband also stopped his car, walked straight up to us and said, "You guys can't go home like this." To which Kai replied, "We're not going home. There's no way we can go home in this situation." The two were definitely on the same wavelength, but Tomoaki and I, well, we were clueless, so I straight up asked them what was going on. The husband turned to me, looked me straight in the eyes and asked, "You went there, didn't you?" My heart skipped 2 beats. How did he know? I immediately felt scared. I knew it. I had done something unforgivable. I answered him honestly and told him that I did. He let out a sigh and said, "If you go home like this, they'll take you." I thought, wait, what? Take me? What's gonna take me? Come on, I was supposed to finally get out of here and enjoy the rest of my summer. I looked at Tomoaki for some kind of support. He was staring at me wide-eyed. I turned to Kai and he said, "It's all right, I've set up an appointment to go get exercised. I've already spoken to them." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were saying that I was possessed. I was going to die. That was the only way this story was going to end. Why didn't the husband warn us to stay away from such a dangerous place? It was my decision to go up there, but at this point, I desperately needed to blame someone else for my stupid actions. The husband said to Kai, "An exorcism, you say? Can you see them?" Kai didn't respond, but Tomoaki interrupted. "What does he mean, Kai? What can you see?" Kai replied, "Please, don't ask me anything." Now it was Tomoaki's turn to get pissed as he grabbed Kai by the collar of his shirt, demanding an answer. The husband stepped right in to stop him and said, "Quit it. You two should be grateful for Kai. You guys can't see them yet. Kai is in the most danger." We both looked at Kai, who was standing there with a really troubled look. Why is Kai in danger? I'm the one that actually went up there. "I know, but you can't see them, can you?" the husband asked. "What do you mean? What am I supposed to be seeing?" "I don't know," the husband replied flatly. What in the actual hell was going on? Here he was telling us Kai was in danger, but he couldn't even tell us what he was supposedly seeing. He continued, "All I know is that they're black. But," he looked at Kai, "I doubt an exorcism will do you any good." "Why?" Kai asked desperately. "Because, well, something similar happened in the past, but I can't get into it." "But it's worth a try, right?" Kai continued. The husband agreed that it was worth a try, but then he said something that broke Kai down. He said, "What if it doesn't work? Once you see them fully, it's going to be real fast." I couldn't figure out what he meant by that. What's going to be real fast? But Kai crumbled as he heard those words and began to cry. Tomoaki and I stood there, unable to console him. Just then, the taxi driver opened the window and asked us if everything was all right. He must have sensed that something serious was going on. None of us replied, and Kai was laying on the ground, face down, crying like hell. The husband finally apologized to the driver and told him to leave us there. The driver didn't know what to do as he looked at the three of us to make sure that was what we wanted. The husband ignored him and said to Kai, "Don't you know why I chased after you guys? Because I know someone who knows what's going on. I'm going to take you to him. He already knows we're coming and he told me to take you guys straight away. We don't have time. Just trust me." Kai, with his face crumpled up and wet from tears, squeezed out some words between his hiccups. He was a mess. He was going through something from the day before, something so big that it was crushing him from the inside. This was the one and only time I saw him cry like this. I told the driver it was okay and paid for our fare. We climbed in the husband's truck. Kay sat inside while Tomoaki and I sat on the tray. It was the most uncomfortable ride of my life because he drove at top speed, not caring that the two of us were bouncing around in the back. I heard Tomoaki give out a girly scream, but I ignored him. Don't know how long we drove for. It probably wasn't that long, but my ass and tailbone were aching when we finally came to a stop in front of a regular-looking house. There was a small torii gate next to it and some stairs through it. We were taken to the house. As the husband rang the doorbell, he warned us to only answer questions that were asked of us. A woman came to the door a short while later. She looked to be in her 20s and made a big impression because she had a huge mole on the center of her forehead. She took us through to a tatami room where 3 people were sitting, waiting for us. I guess one of them was a monk, one was a middle-aged man, and the third was an old man. The 3 of us and the husband sat across from the 3 men. The old man asked if we were the 3 in question, to which the husband said yes, and told him that Kai was already seeing the shadow figures. Was he the one that went upstairs? Asked the monk. No, that was him, pointing at me. This one watched from outside, answered the husband. Have you experienced something like this before? Have you ever seen any entities? The monk directly asked Kai. Kai replied that he hadn't, and the monk looked surprised by that answer, saying how strange it was. I looked over at Kai. He was sitting as stiff as a board, but his arms were visibly shaking. He then said, Am I going to die? Well, if it keeps going this way, then yes, you will die. They will take you. Kai stopped shaking as he looked down, his eyes wide and staring at the tatami in front of him. The monk said, It's normal that you don't understand what's going on. And you, he said, turning to me, did you feel anything when you went upstairs? I heard noises and weird breathing sounds, and there were lots of things stuck onto the door. I think they were ofuda. I see. So you obviously felt a presence there, and although you couldn't see it, you heard it. Its presence usually can't be felt by regular people and lives up there quietly. It didn't really surprise me because by this time I knew that whatever was up there wasn't human. The monk slowly stood up. Kai, can you see it now? No, but the scratching sound won't stop. Okay. It means it can't get into this room. I made sure of it, but it's trying to break through. We can't stay in here forever though. We're gonna have to walk out of here. Let me warn you that it's going to appear. I know it's going to be really tough for you, but you gotta hang in there and stay strong. I promise I'll get you through this. Kai nodded his head up and down, and the 3 of us followed him out of the house. We went through the torii gate and up the stairs. The husband had a few words with the men, bowed to the monk, and left us there, which instantly made me feel lonely. Kai was looking all around, his back hunched over, obviously scared out of his mind, so we made sure he was protected between us as we made our way up. A temple came into view as we reached the top, but instead of going in, the monk turned right and continued walking. There was another torii gate and more stairs up ahead. Before going through the gate, he turned and asked Kai, Can you see it? Yes, it's standing on 2 legs and it's been following us. Standing? It must have been really happy to know that you could see it. We're running out of time. We must hurry. When we finished climbing the stairs, there was a small building that looked like a cabin. Nothing compared to the temple we just saw. The monk went around to the back and called us over. He explained that we were going to stay there for the night. he said. There are no lights inside. You are to remain silent no matter what until daylight breaks. No cell phones either. Anything that emits any sort of light is banned from here on out, and no sleeping or eating allowed. If you need to go to the toilet, you must do so in here. He gave each of us a bag. Upon closer inspection, I did a double take because the bag was made of cloth. How's that going to work? The monk answered my question before I asked it and explained that it was made so that liquid couldn't leak out. It was a bit hard to believe, but there were more important things to worry about. He passed what looked like a bamboo tube around and told us to drink the water inside it. He did the same and proceeded to spray us with it. Go inside, he said to us. Just as Kai stepped through the threshold, he came running back out, covering his mouth, and threw up. Tomoaki and I looked on in shock, and the monk asked us urgently, "You boys didn't go upstairs today, did you?" "No, we went yesterday," I answered. "That's strange. I just purified you so you could go inside, but..." His eyes were wandering around when it stopped at Kai's small man purse. "Did any of you receive anything while you were there?" I answered without really thinking much that we received our wages and a pouch from Makiko and some rice balls from Misaki. "Kai, do you have any of those on you right now?" "The rice balls are in my other bag, but I do have the money and the pouch with me." Kai took them both out and handed them to the monk. He opened the cloth bag first. "This," he said as he showed us its contents. We all peered inside and swallowed. It was stuffed with fingernails, the same red and black pieces of nails that were stuck on my knees and my feet the day before. Kai threw up again. Seeing it happen a second time, I ended up throwing up too. It smelled horrible, and the monk stood there with a grimace on his face. He told all of us to take out everything we had and that he would hold on to them. He made Kai drink another sip and sprayed him again with it. This time, we were able to enter without any problems. "We can't open this door until tomorrow morning. Everyone else will be down in the main hall and no one will be coming up here until daylight. You must ignore anything you hear and you must remain silent. Do not talk to each other and do not let it know where you're seated within this room." All we could do was nod in silence, feeling like we shouldn't let out a sound from that point forward. The monk looked at each of us, shut the door, and walked away. It was cool inside. I was worried about not being able to drink or eat until tomorrow, but it was a comfortable temperature at least, and figured I could tough it out till then. This building was pretty old, and you could see tiny gaps between the wood panels of the wall. The light seeped in through these cracks and I could see Kai and Tomoaki's face clearly. It was a strange feeling to not be able to communicate even though we could see each other. I nodded at them as if to say everything will be okay, and they nodded in return. After a while of sitting in silence, we looked at each other less and less. Not knowing how much time had passed, nor how many more hours we had left, and not being able to talk, all we could do was sit there absent-mindedly. It was still light outside, even though it felt like hours upon hours had already gone by. Tomoaki started moving around, and I saw him pull out a pen and a wrapping paper for a chewing gum. He hadn't listened to the monk and kept these things from him. Seeing this gave me a small sense of relief in this deafening silence and glum situation. He scratched something down on the paper and handed it to me. It read, "Are you guys okay?" I tried to write as small as possible and wrote, "I'm fine. How about you, Kai?" "I'm okay for now. I don't see anything and can't hear anything." The pen and paper went back to Tomoaki. He stated he still had 4 pieces of chewing gum, so a total of 8 pieces of paper. We knew we could only write while it was light out, so thus began our conversation on paper. We tried to guess what time it was. We got there around 1 p.m. and figured it was around 4 o'clock. The 3 hours felt so long. 1 piece of paper gone. Second piece of paper. Tomoaki wrote that my writing was too big, to which I apologized with a hand gesture. I mentioned I was hungry. Kai didn't have anything to write, so he passed it back to Tomoaki. He wrote, "Me too." The silence brought nothing but a feeling of emptiness and the need to talk to one another, but once we were able to communicate, we had nothing to say. I knew I had to write this important message before it got too dark to read. I said, "No matter what happens, we're in this together. We can do it." Kai agreed and Tomoaki wrote, "What if I scream?" I told him to stuff something in his mouth. Kai said we didn't have anything on us, and Tomoaki suggested maybe he should take his clothes off. I ended this ridiculous back and forth by saying, "Let's hope nothing happens until tomorrow comes." The monk never said nothing was going to happen. In fact, he spoke as if something was definitely going to happen, and that's why he gave us all those warnings. We wanted tomorrow to come as quick as possible, but we were also deathly afraid for night to approach. In fact, I was already shitting myself sitting in there. The only thing that made me feel a bit better was the fact that I could see my friends. A heavy cloud hung over us because of what I wrote, so I took the pen and paper and said, "Come on, say something. We don't have much more daylight left." I gave it to Tomoaki. He thought for a bit and asked what we wanted to do when we got home. I told him I needed to go to Tsutaya to return an overdue DVD. It wasn't true, but I wanted to take our mind off of what was happening to us right at that moment. It seemed to work because the guys each wrote what they wanted to do and the air seemed to lift just a bit. We continued to communicate this way and the minutes ticked by. When we were down to the last couple sheets of paper, Kai wrote, "I'm going to heed everything the monk said. I don't want to die." Tomoaki and I stared at those words. None of us have mentioned our own death like this before. I mean, of course not. We were young uni kids and no one really thinks they might die unless they're ill or something. So, seeing our friend write those words shook us to our core and brought us back to reality. I looked into Kai's eyes and gave him a strong, reassuring nod. We stopped writing after this. Taking comfort in each other's presence, we waited for nightfall. Sitting there in silence and having nothing to do, the sound of the cicada crying was ridiculously loud at first. I eventually got used to it and it turned to white noise. But then I heard something else. I couldn't hear it very well at first, but I knew it wasn't the sound of nature. I did my best to concentrate on it, to try to isolate it, and it slowly became clearer. It was that breathing sound. I looked at Kai straight away. It was a bit darker now, so I couldn't see him as much as before, but he didn't seem to have noticed anything. I couldn't remember whether I had told him about that breathing noise. Maybe he'd never heard it before, or maybe he just hadn't noticed yet. In this silence, all of our senses were heightened, and Kai noticed straight away that I was feeling extremely nervous and scared. He started looking all around when he stopped his gaze past my shoulder, right behind me. The whites in his eyes grew and he froze. Tomoaki saw Kai freeze and he looked in the same direction but couldn't seem to find what he was staring at. I was too scared to turn around. But I could hear it. Those airy, irregular breaths. I could tell that it was standing really close to me. We remained frozen until we began to hear something dragging along the ground outside. Tomoaki heard this too, and he grabbed my arm. Now there was a strange squeaking sound between the breathing. I could only hear the sounds, but it was walking circles around the building. I felt Tomoaki's heartbeat pulsating from his arms as he grabbed onto me. I didn't have the mindset to look over at either him nor Kai, but I'm sure they were frozen and barely breathing. None of us moved a muscle. I shut my eyes tight and covered my ears to block out the sounds. I prayed for it to go away. I don't know how much time went by. Maybe it was just a few minutes, but when I opened my eyes and looked around, it was pitch dark inside. I couldn't see a thing. And the sound was gone. I wasn't sure whether that wave of terror was over or whether that thing was still outside somewhere. Regardless, I couldn't move. I wasn't allowed to ask if the guys were all right. I knew Tomoaki was right next to me because he was still holding on to my arm. I got really worried about Kai because he was clearly looking at something just before. I tried to look for him, but it was like I'd gone blind. All I could see was pitch darkness no matter how hard I opened my eyes and tried to see. I took Tomoaki's hand in mine and slowly began to move in the direction of where Kai was. I went as slow as possible to not make a sound and as to not scare the guys. If I scared either of them and they panicked, I knew it would be the end. I held onto Tomoaki's hand with my left hand, stretched my right arm out and slowly crept forward. I waved my arm around to increase my chances of finding Kai when my fingertips bumped into something hard. My heart almost exploded. From its texture, I knew I'd hit a wall. That's weird. I was sure I moved towards the direction of Kai, but he wasn't there. I started to panic. I turned and we began to move. Again, we hit a wall. I felt like crying. I couldn't even call out to ask where Kai was. I stood there not knowing what else to do when Tomoaki pulled on my arm. He took over and began moving forward. Once we reached another wall, he made me touch it. We then moved along it until we reached the corner and continued along the next wall. After a while, Tomoaki suddenly stopped walking. He took my arm and made me touch something warm. It was Kai, and I could feel him shaking. Wait a second. Was it Kai? And how could I be sure that whoever I was holding hands with was Tomoaki? In the pitch dark, I became so paranoid and started double-guessing everything. Tomoaki took my arm again, began moving, and I just followed. Then, out of nowhere, I began to see something. It was the moonlight. It was only a small bit of light, but it was coming through one of the gaps in the wall. Tomoaki was trying to take me to that spot. I don't know why I didn't notice myself. It wasn't the kind of darkness you have in your bedroom where your eyes get used to it after a while and you can see outlines of the furniture in your room. It was literally pitch dark in there, and human eyes weren't evolved enough to see in such darkness. Not only that, but I was swallowed up in fear. When I saw the faint moonlight, I felt saved and couldn't be more thankful for Tomoaki's existence than in that moment. I asked him about it after the fact, and he explained that maybe he was able to see that light because he wasn't as wrapped up in terror as Kai and I were. All Tomoaki could hear was the dragging sound outside, not the breathing, so he had enough mind space to think a bit more clearly than us. As we got to the side of the cabin with the moonlight and finally sat down, I saw that Tomoaki was holding on to Kai with his other hand. I looked at his face and saw that he was dripping with sweat and wet with tears. I don't know what happened or what he saw, but I could imagine. As opposed to the loud cicadas crying in the afternoon, it was super quiet now, other than the crickets. We sat there not moving. 3 college kids sitting in a circle, tightly holding hands with one another. With barely enough light to see each other, having the sure sensation that we were there together was the only way any of us felt safe. And then it finally happened. I mean, it was inevitable. Tomoaki took out the cloth bag that the monk gave to us earlier from his pocket, stood up and walked a couple of steps away. In the silence, we heard him taking a piss. Kai and I looked at each other and smiled. Just as we did so, we heard something. Kai! We remained silent until we heard it again. Kai! It was coming from the direction of the door. We knew who it was. It was Misaki. She said, Kai! Kai! I brought you some rice balls. There were long pauses between each sentence, as if she was waiting for us to respond. The weird thing was that there was no inflection in her voice. She spoke in a flat tone like a robot. I felt Kai's grip tighten and then heard the voice call out for him again. Another stretch of silence. Finally, the voice began repeating the same sentences over and over again like a broken record. I remembered the monk's words, how he said no one would be coming to see us until the morning. The flat mechanical way the voice spoke, it wasn't Misaki. We all knew it, but it sounded exactly like her. We were shitting bricks by this point. I noticed Tomoaki was back with us and he grabbed our arms. I knew he could hear the voice from the strength in his grip. We were all looking in the direction of the door and we didn't dare move. The voice was still repeating itself. Then the door began to shake. Whatever was outside was trying to pry open the door while it kept talking without interruption. I began thinking of what to do if it broke the door down and came in. I would run out at top speed towards the main hall where the monk said he and the others would be. But where's the main hall? The only thing I could think about was how to get out of this place. The noise suddenly changed to loud bangs as if the thing was ramming the door with its body, all the while still repeating the same phrases. Then it slowly began to move to the left. We could hear it dragging along the wall. We were sitting there barely breathing out of fear that it could hear us when I made a horrifying realization. There was a gap in the wall where we were sitting, and the thing was slowly making its way around the cabin towards us. What if it saw us through the gap? What if we saw it? I got up as quickly and as quietly as I could and pulled Tomoaki and Kai towards the center of the room where the moonlight couldn't reach. It was still moving along the walls. My heart was thumping so loud I was scared that it would give our location away, or maybe it already knew where we were. My teeth started to chatter and I quickly bit down on my finger to stop the sounds. And then I saw it appear through the gap in the wall. It was illuminated by the moon. I could only hear it up to this point, but now I could clearly see it. It was pitch black except for its slanted eyes, which were completely white and seemed to be bulging out of its face. I assumed the thing was ramming its entire body into the door just before, but I was wrong. It was actually using its head. The face would disappear as if it was arching its back to the fullest, and in the next second, its face appeared again as it slammed its head into the wall. I could see its bulging white eyes as it repeatedly bashed into it. I wasn't paralyzed like the day before when I was on the second floor. I was shaking like a leaf. I was scared like hell, but I couldn't look away. Misaki's voice was still talking as it continued to smash its head against the wall. This thing was anything but an actual human being. After a while of hearing and watching this horrendous scene unfolding in front of me, it stopped. It began to slowly move again, which made me think that it hadn't been able to see us. Thank God for that. But it continued to replay in my mind, and I was at a point where I couldn't distinguish reality from my imagination. We remained still and silent as ever as it began to move again. Tomoaki decided to take us back to the moonlight, and when he grabbed my arm, he apparently thought I was dead. The reason for that was because my body was so stiff. He literally thought I died and my body was going through rigor mortis. Kai told us later that he was gritting his teeth so hard that his gums were bleeding. And again, Tomoaki was the only one who didn't see anything, but he did hear something that neither of us heard. As the thing moved further away from the cabin, he heard it squawking like a crow. The thing didn't come back after that, but none of us were able to relax. Our heads hung low, and we didn't even look at each other anymore. Kai had wet himself, but we didn't think anything of it. We certainly couldn't blame him for doing so. I'd never felt this kind of exhaustion in my life. I'd never seen a creature like that before or since, and never had I experienced a night that was longer than this one. Even when the first morning light began to seep through into the cabin, we remained frozen in place, our heads still hanging down. The sound of sparrows chirping, the faraway sounds of cars on the road, Everything seemed muffled. I wondered whether I would ever get out alive. When it was quite light out, we heard something walking towards the cabin. We tensed up again, preparing for yet another wave of terror. The footsteps got closer and went around to the back, stopping by the door. It began to rattle, and then we heard it open. The monk stood there and looked like he was about to cry as he saw us huddled together. "You did well," he said. I don't think I'll ever forget his eyes as he said those words. It was the kindest, most gentle gaze anyone could be capable of giving. I couldn't stand as all of my energy flooded out in one huge gush, and I started crying like a baby. He walked in despite the fact that the cabin was filthy with our sweat and piss, and gave each one of us a tight hug. I could smell incense on him, and I knew at this moment that I was going to live. And when I realized this, I began crying even harder. When the monk saw that I still couldn't stand, he called over the other man, and they carried me down to the house from the previous day. As we passed the temple, all three of us heard a scream. It started out low and then went up in pitch. Tomoaki said in my ear, "Didn't that sound like Makiko?" I didn't think it was, but it didn't not sound like her either. I was way too tired to think about it. When we got into the house, the 20-something-year-old girl looked at us with a somewhat disgusted face and told us to go wash ourselves. Can't blame her. We looked and smelt absolutely horrible. Too scared to be alone, the three of us took a shower together. When we were squeaky clean, we were led into the same tatami room as before. There were 3 futons laid out for us, so they were obviously telling us that the next step was to sleep. I knew this house was safe, and being so exhausted that it was almost painful, the 3 of us fell into a deep sleep as soon as our heads hit the pillow. Just as I slipped into a dreamless sleep, I had a quick thought to remind myself to call our other 2 friends that we were coming home. It was such a minor thing considering the ordeal we just went through, but our friends didn't know that we were literally about to die and that our plans to meet up were down the drain. I forgot to mention that when we walked out of the cabin, I asked Kai whether he could see anything. He said, "No, I can't see anything. We're saved. Thank you." When I heard him thank me, I decided to keep his loose bowel movements our little secret. We were alive and safe, and that's all that mattered. When we woke up, the monk explained everything to us. I learned of how scary human beings could get and how a very strong belief system could give rise to a terrifying reality. What Kai and I witnessed with our eyes and what Tomoaki heard, when we learned of its true nature, we just wanted to run away from this place forever. For those of you who have stuck through this story, thank you. I didn't think it would end up being this long. I didn't want to take any shortcuts, and so I wrote every single detail that I could remember. I apologize if it doesn't meet your expectations. From this point forward, I'm going to explain what the monk said to us, so I encourage you to read on only if you're curious to find out.